So the last type of biodiversity or level of biodiversity is called ecosystem diversity. And that includes the different biological communities and their associations with the chemical and physical environment, the ecosystem. So if you'll remember, an ecosystem is a community of interacting organisms, lots of different species, and their physical environment. So we're including the chemical environment. The physical environment includes temperature, moisture, elements, minerals, those kinds of things. It includes both the biotic and abiotic components. So biotic means all the living components, and abiotic all the non-living. So biotic would be trees and moss and birds. Abiotic might be nutrients, rocks, water. So ecosystem diversity contains many complex interactions. And there are a few different keys to ecosystem diversity. We need to conserve all the different types of ecosystems. We need to conserve the interactions among organisms within the ecosystem. So we need to make sure that all the predation interactions are occurring, all the mutualisms, all those kinds of things. And we'll talk more about those in a little bit. We also need to conserve ecosystem function. So nutrient cycling, the production of plant material, the production of different wildlife species. A lot of these are things that people actually benefit from. So ecosystem function like retaining water, purifying water, pollination, all these sorts of things can be very important. And finally, conserving connections among ecosystems. So if there are animals that move between the ocean and the forest, or from saltwater to freshwater environments, we need to conserve those movements because they're moving nutrients and energy between different ecosystems that might be important for ecosystem function and the ability for that ecosystem to persist into the future. So one part I talked about was conserving all types of ecosystems. One example is shortleaf pine forest, which is a state endangered ecosystem. And you can see in this map here, this is the historic range of the shortleaf pine. And you can see where we live, it was widespread. Basically, on the top of every hill around here, there should have been a shortleaf pine ecosystem. And it looks something like this. So it's not just shortleaf pine trees, but the shortleaf pine trees are really tall and they make this super canopy, and then there are other trees underneath. But the trees are really spaced apart and there's a lot of grass underneath, often referred to as the prairie under the trees. There's only 5 to 10% of this remaining in Louisiana, but historically there were 4 to 6 million acres. There's currently a restoration effort going on at Wafer Creek Ranch in Ruston. And basically you need a lot of prescribed fire to keep the understory down. So if you'll think about the forest you've seen around here, usually they're very, very dense and there's lots and lots of plants growing at the lower level. So like if you wanted to walk through it, it'd be really difficult because there'd be all these shrubby things and vines in your way. Shortleaf pine forest should look very open. It should be easy to see through it. You should be able to walk through it relatively easily because it's grassland underneath these tall trees. So we need to conserve all different types of ecosystems, and so preserving things like shortleaf pine forest is going to be really important for this portion of ecosystem diversity. We need to preserve connections among ecosystems. So an example of this is salmon in the Pacific Northwest. So salmon do most of their growing out in the ocean, and they accumulate all these marine nutrients and energy. And then when it's time for them to breed, they swim upstream into freshwater river and then into stream systems. And then they breed and they die. And so they move all these nutrients from the ocean into these streams. What I think is really neat is that there's a lot of predators that also like to eat the salmon. And so bears are really important here. So they'll eat lots and lots of salmon, but they only like to eat part of the fish and then they leave the rest on the forest floor. And the nutrients in the salmon get released into the soil and actually help the trees grow. And scientists have looked at the rings in the trees and looked at the nutrients, and they've actually seen that you can tell which years more salmon came upstream because the trees grew better those years. So these salmon out in the ocean are affecting stream ecosystems when they come in to breed, but they're also affecting the forest, and these connections are really important. And so part of preserving ecosystem diversity is preserving these connections between these different types of ecosystems. And this just shows a map of how this works. Places where salmon are gathering nutrients, where they're eating out in the ocean, these summer feeding grounds and the wintering grounds. And then when they migrate inland to breed, you can see they go up these rivers and streams into these forests that are pretty far inland. So we see areas in the ocean are affecting areas on land pretty far apart and vice versa.